All right. So last week we finished chapter 5 of Daniel. In that chapter, we saw Daniel interpret the writing on the wall for Belshazzar. It was not a warning, as the visions were for Nebuchadnezzar. It was a proclamation of judgment. Belshazzar had sinned in a manner that God just brought judgment on him. That being, he blasphemed God because he knew of Daniel, he knew of his grandfather's faith and how he came to faith, and yet he rejected God. And then, of course, we find out that he also desecrated those holy vessels that were taken from the temple. And because of that, God judged him. And that judgment was carried out that very night. He was killed, and his kingdom was taken over. And we met the new ruler last week. In the final verse of chapter 5, we read about Darius, the Mede, or Medianite. Median, that's what they said, Median. And he was how old? 62, right? Yeah. So this week we begin chapter 6, and we are going to meet Darius. And Darius, as a new king, has taken a diplomatic approach to reigning over such a large kingdom. You know, he does not have the reign that Nebuchadnezzar did. He does not have the power, he does not have the influence. So as a new ruler over a very large kingdom, he does something that is probably a pretty good idea. He appoints 120 princes or leaders over that entire region, that entire area that he is king over. And those 120 leaders, you know where they came from? Did he bring them in? Are they Medes and Persians? No, they're people from that live in the area. So, of course, that's a little easier to accept, isn't it? If your area gets a new leader, but then he starts appointing leaders from the community to head things up, well, you're okay with that because, you know this guy and he's the community leader. So he appoints 120 princes, basically, over the region. And over those 120 princes, he appoints 3 chief leaders. The King James refers to them as presidents. And of those 3, guess who is one of them? Daniel. And guess who is the number 1 of them? Daniel. Yeah. He is the chief overseer. He is the one that is preferred by Darius. So tonight we're going to begin by reading verses 1 through 4, and we will see Daniel as a man of godly character. So let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 4 together. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So the first thing we see here is a description of the kind of man that Daniel is, the kind of servant that Daniel is, both to God and to the king. He is a faithful man. He has godly character. He is listed as first among the chief leaders because of an excellent spirit in him. This may have something to do with the wisdom that he has shown in the past regarding the dreams and interpretations of Nebuchadnezzar, even his reputation before Belshazzar. Because if you remember, when the queen came in and told Belshazzar, hey, there's somebody in the kingdom that can do this, he can tell you what that means and everything else, she talked him up, but then it was almost like Belshazzar remembered about that Daniel, because Daniel had a reputation. Matter of fact, that reputation included these words of him being someone that was having great wisdom and having an excellent spirit in him. And it was almost a repeat of that same thing. It's all because of Daniel's faithfulness to God. So because Daniel is faithful to God, other people see that godly character in him because he's somebody that can be trusted. He's somebody that is faithful to his God. He is somebody that is faithful to whatever task you put him to. He is without fault. That's what it says. Now, that does not mean Daniel was sinless. It just means that in his practices as a leader and his moral character were that of an upright man. And he possessed true character. When you talk about true character, it's that those actions and those things that you do, the way that you are when no one is looking. That's true character. And Daniel was a man of true character because they tried to find fault. He was in government business for probably 60 years. And they could not go back in all that term and find that Daniel did anything that they could accuse him against. Now, can you imagine anybody being in politics in this day and age for 60 years? And you laugh, but there's some of them that have probably been in there that long that could say, I am without fault in my entire 60 years. There is nothing that you could find fault or accuse me of impropriety of any manner. It's kind of like that whole thing we hear every now and then about, I don't want to see the books of the billionaire that came and took a job for no money and ran. I want to see the books of all the people that were not millionaires when they became politicians and now they're billionaires from being politicians. Daniel was not that kind of guy. 60 years in politics, and they couldn't find anything to accuse him. There was nothing in Daniel's life that they could find fault with. And boy, when they found out that Darius was going to put Daniel even over those presidents, it was not going to be him being one of the three. It was going to be those two or three answering to Daniel, and then Daniel answering to the king. So Daniel would be in second charge only to the king. Kind of interesting how God puts godly people in that position so many times. He's done it with Daniel, with Nebuchadnezzar. He did it with Joseph. He does that. He puts them in that place where they're second in command. But the princes and the presidents, they don't like that idea. They don't like that idea at all. So they looked for whatever they could find. And there was absolutely no corruption, no compromise anywhere. His integrity, his character was impeccable. He faithfully fulfilled his duties without fault. He's a man of character. And this probably irritated those officials so much. Probably because many of them may have had those skeletons in the closet, so to speak. And they figured if they did, everybody did. So we see Daniel's godly character in the first 4 verses. And then in verses 4 through 9, we see government corruption. Imagine that. Then the presidents and princes, starting at verse 4, sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then the presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. So since the officials couldn't find any reason to accuse Daniel before the king, they figured the only way to destroy him was to make his religious practices illegal. They had to place Daniel in a position where he would have to choose between being loyal to the Lord or being loyal to the king, loyal to the government. So they hatched this plot against Daniel. The officials approached the king with their proposal. They urged Darius to issue a decree stating every citizen should pray only to the king for 30 days. And any citizen that prayed to anybody, any god or any man other than Darius would be executed by being thrown into the lion's den. I say corruption in government because, you look at all the things that go on in the lawmaking and all the things that go on behind the scenes. We see something and we say, well, this is the way it should be. This is what the law says. And they walk out there and they hand you this thing and it's, here's that law. Well, that law should take 2 lines. Well, we had to get this in there and that in there. And we had to take care of this group and that group. And so they get together and they collude and they make things happen behind the scenes. Government corruption. These officials all got together with one end. What was that end? To destroy one man. Man, does that sound familiar? To destroy one man. They got together and plotted. And it worked. They went to the king. They did a little sucking up. Oh, King Darius, live forever. This guy's just been appointed king. He just appointed himself king. He's given you a position of a little bit of authority, but now all of a sudden you're going in there and you want him to live forever? Yeah, he should know better. But they schmooze him a little bit. And they talk him into signing this decree. And because of the law of the Medes and the Persians, which basically came down to when the king or the person of royal authority took that signet ring and sealed that thing with the wax, that it could not be changed. It could not be altered. That was a final document. And you notice something here. When we read about their approach to the king and what they tell the king, all the presidents of the kingdoms, the governors and the princes and the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute. What does all mean? All means all, and that's all means. But there was somebody that was not included in that all, wasn't there? Daniel. So they lied to the king. They presented it as if everybody was in agreement. Well, everybody except for the one person that it was going to affect was in agreement. Because he was not told about it until after. This proposal probably sounded pretty good to the king. He's a new king. He's just begun to reign over this huge empire. He's got these 120 princes out there. He's got his 3 presidents. And they're coming to him and saying, hey, this is what we should do. And he's thinking, man, this is what the people want. The people want 30 days of nobody bowing to anything, worshiping anything but me as your new king. This sounds good. And it's what they want. So Darius probably feels like, I'm giving the people what they want. So he signs it, not knowing the true intent of the law. You know, one of the things I see from this passage is the testimony that Daniel had. All the officials knew that Daniel's commitment to God was so strong that he would remain faithful to the Lord. They were counting on that. They didn't have any doubt in their mind that when this decree went into effect, they did not think for a minute that Daniel would stop praying for 30 days. Why? Because they knew Daniel's character. They knew who Daniel was. They knew how Daniel was. Daniel was a godly man, and they knew that he prayed 3 times a day. And they knew when it came down to making a choice between doing what God says and what the government says, that Daniel had no problem with that decision. And they were counting on that. I wonder if we were put in a similar position. If people that we know would think, oh, poor Bob, he's going to die because he's not going to stop praying. He's not going to stop. Do people think that about us? That's the kind of character Daniel had. All these princes and these other presidents knew Daniel's character. They knew his devotion to God. And they knew they could use that against him. Daniel was a man of great conviction. Look at verses 10 and 11. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Daniel was a prayer warrior. He prayed 3 times a day, probably morning, noon, and night. It was a big part of his life. He sought the Lord continually, not just daily in his normal prayers, but whenever there was a need, he prayed. When Daniel learned about the decree, he was facing a pretty serious dilemma there. If he failed to show that his loyalty belonged to the new king and the new government system, he would be executed. He would be fed to the lions. But on the other hand, if he compromised his commitment to the Lord by ceasing to pray, he would displease God and possibly lose God's protection and all the blessings that God had given him. So his choice between losing his life on earth or losing the Lord's blessing on his life was a no-brainer. Daniel did as he did before. And he went in and he kneeled down and he prayed. He didn't hide himself. He did it right before the windows. He didn't say, well, okay, so I just won't do it out in the open. I'll do it so nobody sees me. No, it was his custom to pray in front of the windows, facing towards Jerusalem where the temple was, because the temple was the place where they believed that God's presence dwelt. So when they prayed, they faced that way. And Daniel didn't divert from that. He continued to do what he had done every day. Now, God's law tells us that we should obey the laws of the government, the leaders that are over us, unless it is in opposition to God's law. For Daniel to bow down to the king and to fail to continue what he has always done concerning the Lord? He could not do. He would not do, because that is in opposition to God's law. Daniel made the choice to obey the Lord. He refused to compromise his integrity and commitment to the Lord. He continued his daily prayer. He went to his upstairs room with the window open towards Jerusalem. It was his daily place of prayer. And Daniel knelt and he gave thanks to the Lord, just as he had many times before, for many years. We got to keep in mind now, this is Daniel in his 80s, and he's been praying every day for all these years. But those officials, those ones that are plotting against him, they're out there watching and they're waiting. And as soon as they see what they need to see, they bring those charges back to the king. Verses 12 through 15, we'll finish it tonight, at least those verses. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Even by the king. Once it was sealed and done, it was done. Yeah, as they witnessed Daniel's violations, the officials wasted no time in reminding the king of the decree and the penalty. And the king confirmed that the law of the Medes and the Persians was irrevocable, so the decree stood. It could not be repealed. When the king confirmed that fact, the officials felt their plot was successful. They've got Daniel bound up in this and he could not escape. And that's when they made these 3 charges. First, that he was a Jewish loyalist, a man who gave his loyalty to the Jews and to their God and not to the king. That Daniel, which was of the children of the captivity of Judah, right away, they accuse him, because he is a Jew, that he committeth treason, deliberately betraying the king and his laws. He regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed. And finally, that he continued to pray to his God 3 times a day, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. They make 3 accusations against him. All 3 of them punishable under this decree by being cast into the lion's den. And we see that the king, he is displeased, but his displeasure is not with Daniel. This is a grievous charge brought against Daniel for the king, because I think the king, even in this short time, has come to trust Daniel and respect Daniel and know Daniel to be a man of great character and be trustworthy, and to find out that this plot was nothing more than an attack to get Daniel bothered the king. And the king tried to do whatever he could. He thought long and hard about it. He contemplated any possible way of getting out of having to put Daniel in the lion's den, because it was an irrevocable law. It was a decree that could not be changed. It could not be altered. There was no place for him to add a but clause on the end of it, or try to change who it is. Oh, it's only for citizens, not for government officials. No, there was no place for him to modify this law, this decree. The king's men, those princes and those other presidents, they thought that Darius was going to be hostile towards Daniel for breaking this decree, but it was quite the opposite. I think his hostility was towards them, towards himself, for allowing himself to be manipulated. Somehow, these officials heard about the king's thought process and trying to prolong, put off what needed to be done. And that's what we see in verse 15, is them going back and reminding him again, hey, it's official. It's been a decree. You can't change it. You can't alter it. It's according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. And you're ruling as a Mede and the Persian. You can't change this. So they're trying to force his hand. Before the sun set that day, Daniel would have to be put into the lion's den. So we're going to stop right there tonight. Next week, we'll get to the lion's den. But just think about what an example Daniel is. Think about how steadfast he was in his daily prayer time. He was willing to die before he would miss a single time opportunity for prayer. How many of us have a daily prayer time? How many of us have more than one prayer time? How many of us would let something get in the way of that prayer time? Something came up, I didn't have time. Daniel was not affected by it. You know, that's something I've said many times now. I do not respect their false religion. But if there is one thing that is to be admired of the Muslim faith, of the Islamic people, is their dedication to prayer. Because they are 3 times a day. They are faithful to their prayer. Isn't it 5 times a day? I'm not even sure. Yeah. But they are faithful to that. Most Christians, and I'll throw the air quotes, Christians have trouble taking one opportunity a day to spend time in prayer. Daniel was faithful to at least 3 times a day. Not to mention any other things that came up that he prayed about. I wonder how many Christians would be willing to dedicate themselves to that kind of prayer life, that kind of worship, if they knew they could lose their life for doing it. I think far too many of us take prayer for granted. And a lot of people only go to the Lord in prayer as a last resort. But not Daniel. He was steadfast in his commitment to the Lord. He was a man of godly character. Even though he was involved in a government that was filled with corruption. Next week, we will get to Daniel being put into the lion's den. And we'll see how it all turns out. For now, let's have a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this time together tonight to pray and to study your word. And we pray, Lord, that you would give us hearts like Daniel, that we would be steadfast in our prayer life and our devotion to you, Lord, and that we would not be swayed by anything. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.